We all accredit the samurai for being one of the greatest warriors of all time. However, did you know that one of the most legendary samurai was a black man from Africa? Oh, you did? Well, did you know that he wasn't a slave? Enter the infamous Yasuke. For the last few days, the internet has been in a complete uproar about the historical accuracy of a video game called Assassin's Creed Shadows, where you play as Yasuke, a black samurai that dates into the 1570s. Now, when Hollywood anglicizes a character set in a certain period in a certain time, no one ever bats an eyelash. But when you introduce a person of color as their protagonist, you seem to have all this hoopla. So we're going to get right to the point. We know that he comes from Mozambique, but he was captured and sold in India to the Portuguese. Shortly thereafter, he served as a mercenary and personal bodyguard to the Italian Jesuit Alejandro Vignano, who was adequately trained in unarmed and armed combat, way before he even picked up a katana. Upon their arrival in Japan in 1579, he was taught some of the Japanese language so he could better understand and communicate with his new surroundings. 1579 was one of the most significant times in Japanese history. It was right before the unification of Japan, so there was still a lot of feudal lords battling for position. This is around the same time that the TV show Shogun takes place. It's also around the same time that the greatest swordsman who's ever lived, Miyamoto Musashi, was born. When he finally arrived in Japan, the people lost their minds. They've never seen a black man before. And he was getting mobbed in the streets everywhere he went. Sometimes he would have to hide inside a temple so people would leave him alone. You can only imagine how many times people tried to touch his hair. Apparently, Yasuke was an incredible specimen regardless of timeline. He was 6'2", 200 pounds, and according to Japanese documents, possessed the strength of 10 men. Word spread around quickly and eventually caught the ear of the most powerful man in Japan at the time, the daimyo, Oda Nobunaga. Nobunaga insists on meeting this gigantic human being and is immediately enamored by him. He didn't believe that his skin was actually black, so there's this whole thing about him stripping his clothes down and trying to wash him. And once he realized that his skin was actually that color, he equated him with the divinity of the Buddha statues that were populated among the countryside. Nobunaga wasn't particularly religious, but when a 6'2" black guy shows up to your shore speaking Japanese, you kind of think that this guy is probably one with the heavens. Nobunaga was impressed with his physicality, but he was also impressed by his mind. He's never met a person who's traveled outside the realm of Japan before. Yasuke has seen at least 3 different continents, which means he spoke probably several different languages and has seen things that he couldn't possibly imagine. So the conversation between them was extremely deep. Nobunaga's family took a liking to him as well. Nobunaga's nephew even gave him 10,000 Japanese gold coins just as a gift. The Jesuit saw this, was like, "You're a pretty rich man now, why don't you just hang out with these guys?" So he did. This is when he received the name Yasuke, which many believe is just a mispronunciation of the name Yasuke. He was also given his own ceremonial katana and home to live in. In time, Yasuke became Nobunaga's weapon bearer and eventually became his retainer, aka a samurai. Proving that Yasuke was really about the business, he fought alongside the daimyo during his campaign against Takeda Katsuyori, a rival daimyo in the neighboring region. Bad boys for life. After the battle, Yasuke met with some of the most important men in Japanese history, including Toyotomi Hideyoshi and Tokugawa Ieyasu, who would later become Japan's very first shogun. Unfortunately, one day Nobunaga's generals betrays him and shows up with his temple with 13,000 Oda clan troops, attempting to overthrow him and take his place. Now, all the other daimyo were busy fighting other battles. They were left vulnerable to the attack. During the battle, Nobunaga was wounded by a spear and headed inside the temple. Facing certain death and no other options, he decided to die with honor and commit seppuku with the help of Yasuke. After the battle, Yasuke fled with Nobunaga's remains and linked up with Nobunaga's son, Nobutada. They had to move fast. The remainder of that 15,000 Oda clan army was on the way to take over his son's bunker. Unfortunately, they lost the battle, and Yasuke was captured. The general that betrayed Nobunaga, Akechi Mitsuhide, made everyone in the temple commit seppuku except for Yasuke. Akechi was a bit of a racist scumbag who didn't believe Yasuke was even human because, well, he wasn't Japanese. Therefore, did not have the right to die with honor. Instead, he was given back to the Jesuits like he was a dog that wandered into the neighbor's yard. Cool. Because all of his close companions and lords were killed, Yasuke was stripped of all of his titles and receded into obscurity. However, 2 weeks later, after Nobunaga's clan was destroyed, Toyotomi intercepted a letter to Traitor General Mitsuhide. All the Nobunaga's homies pulled up to avenge their fallen comrade. Now, there was no official mention of Yasuke, but an historian did recall a man with a cold colored complexion shooting cannons off in the distance. Could Yasuke have given up arms to defend his homeboy? What would you do in that situation? Now, we don't know what really happened with Yasuke after this, but we do know Yasuke proves that the spirit of the samurai has no color. It is about the loyalty and the indomitable spirit that you have within oneself. So, your energy is somewhere out there, Yasuke. So, for one black samurai to another, puss.